All right, folks, if I could get everyone to begin taking their seats, we'll begin here momentarily. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and begin. Good morning. Okay, so we'll try that one more time. Good morning. Good morning. All right. Well, on behalf of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency Director, Mr. Kelly McKeag, welcome to the Louisville Family Member Update. Thank you all for coming today. What I'd like everyone to do now is please stand for the singing of the national anthem. We have a special, what I call a special guest with us, Mr. Jamarian Jones, a junior at North Hardin High School in Ratcliffe. So I'm going to ask Jamarian to come forward, please.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right, please take your seats. Jamarian, thank you very much, bub. And to your mom from the Army Service Casualty Office, thank you, Mom. Very proud moment. All right, folks, what I'd like to do now, my name is Todd Livick, and I'm going to be your MC here this morning. And what I'd like to do now is just go over a couple of logistical announcements. Number one, hopefully everyone's already found the refreshments on my right, y'all's left. Bathrooms are located right outside the hallway. Please, if you feel like if you need to get up and do anything throughout the morning, briefings, please feel free to do so. We will, so we have Fox, the local Fox station here, just for everyone's awareness, which is a great thing. And oh, by the way, today is Armed Forces Day. So again, what a great way to start the morning off with Jamarian singing the national anthem. Did he do an awesome job or what? Let's give. So we do have the media here. If they approach you and you don't want to be interviewed, we have a number of public affairs officers here that can facilitate it if you want to do an interview or if you're not comfortable doing an interview. We are also doing, how many of y'all are on social media? All right, so we're doing Facebook Live this morning as well. So we've upped our game. We've got some better equipment now so that folks can see slides and see the briefers. So that's a good news story. And if you haven't friended us on Facebook, I challenge each of y'all sometime this morning or in the next couple of days to become our friend and get a lot of information about what we do as a mission. So today, what a wonderful opportunity to continue a two-way conversation. So if I can see a quick show of hands, how many is this the first time that you've been to a family member update? All right, so we have a number of families. Just from my curiosity, anybody over, is this like their fifth or sixth or seventh family member update? Okay, so for those families that have questions, there are a lot of folks in here who can give good advice. But the key today is that two-way conversation. It's your opportunity today. First, this morning, you're going to hear briefings, but also in your one-on-one to ask questions. Remember, we're like a family. We're not always going to agree with each other, and maybe sometimes we don't like each other. But at the end of the day, we're going to honor your missing loved one. And that's what this is really all about. Your missing loved one. So let's keep that conversation going. And again, the challenge will be, don't just make today the only time you have that conversation. If you have a question, ask the question. Have that open line of communication to make sure that we're honoring your loved one. All right, so without further ado, I'd like now to introduce our director, Mr. Kelly McCagg.
Honored that you're able to share the day with us today. Better? So much for lavaliers. So for the third time, oh, geez. We are supposed to be a highly technologically advanced organization. Please do not judge us by that. I will lower this so as not to blow you all out. We're deeply honored that you're able to share the day with us today. Throughout the day, you'll meet talented, dedicated members of the Department of Defense. But I'd also like to introduce you to some supporters, strong supporters of this mission. First, from the Kentucky Department Veterans of Foreign Affairs, their Senior Vice Commander, Doc Doherty, their Judge Advocate General, Ed Vincent. From the U.S. Army Brotherhood of Tankers, Carlin Morris and K.P. Kerwall. And we're also pleased to have with us today a staff member from Senator McConnell's office, Andrew Condia. And from Congressman Massey's office, Stacy Rockaway. Our mission may seem intuitively obvious to you, but I would submit to you it's our North Star. It's the reason why we are charged to do what we do. We are here to serve you. But inherent to that mission statement is the fact that in addition to the commitment that we make to you, there's also a fulfillment of a promise made to your loved one, who this nation sent off to war and who never came back, who paid the ultimate sacrifice. But there are also markers to those veterans who lost comrades in arms in the wars, as well as to those who currently serve in uniform today. And the values you see there are unique. They're unique because this is a unique mission. And it's values that we in the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency must perform on a daily basis. We accept personal responsibility to serve you and your loved one with compassion, with integrity, respect, teamwork, and innovation. So these markers are our navigational tools toward that North Star, which guide us in our mission. This is a mission global in scope. 75% of the losses that we pursue are in the Indo-Pacific region. And while the numbers may appear daunting, each number represents a hero. Each number has a unique story associated with it. And that story transcends generations, transcends time. And it also allows us to be able to connect with you, because those stories and those memories are passed down. So they're more than just numbers, as you well know. And we look at each one uniquely. No, it's the reason because it transcends time and generations, and it's the reason that it is something that creates a visceral reaction, that the mission is at least interpreted by our host nation partners as one is humanitarian. Because again, there is a loss, a void in both life and heart, represented by each of you here today. And that's why the nations that we deal with look at this as a humanitarian mission. To give you an idea of what it is we do and how we do it, we'd like to share with you a short video as to this mission and its global scope and humanitarian nature.
We write no last chapters. We close no books. We put away no final memories. An end to America's involvement in Vietnam cannot come before we have achieved the fullest possible accounting of those missing in action.
Why keep searching? The answer's simple. You never leave a fallen American behind. The mission of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA, is to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel to their families and their nation. Strategically located in Arlington, Virginia, with major facilities at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Hawaii, and Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, the more than 600-person newly established defense agency is jointly manned by soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Department of Defense civilians with specialized skills. Researching, recovering, identifying, and ultimately returning an individual to their family begins with analysis and investigation. The DPAA experts begin the search by studying all known information regarding the circumstances of each loss. Historians and analysts gather information from U.S. veterans, foreign witnesses, archival records, and other sources. They then create a case file for each unaccounted for American. This file may include historical records, official correspondence, maps, photographs, daily activity logs, and medical and personnel records of the missing person. These files are continually updated until an identification is made.
Well, the research is done here. Once we have enough research, we get approval from our leadership, either to do a small two-person team investigation, which we call our research investigation team, where they just basically go on either canvas villages or conduct interviews in smaller towns or cities to just gather enough information that would warrant us to do field operations.
Once all available information is analyzed, a decision can be made to disinter individuals buried as unknown or conduct field investigations. During a typical investigation mission, personnel interview potential witnesses, conduct on-site reconnaissance, and survey terrain for safety and logistical concerns. Teams also try to generate new leads that may result in future recoveries. The main goal of the investigation is to obtain enough information to correlate or connect a particular site with one or more missing Americans. If enough on-site evidence is found, the site will be recommended for recovery and excavation. Recovery sites range in size from a few square meters, such as in individual burials, to areas larger than football fields for aircraft crashes. DPAA may hire as many as 100 local workers to help with the excavation process.
As we're doing excavation, we want to be able to control all of the aspects of that excavation. One of the things with archaeology and excavation is you only get one chance. It's a destructive process, and so we need to make sure that we do it the right way, especially for cases like this where it's forensic archaeology and these remains need to be properly handled for families. For me, this job as my primary occupation is very important because I'm able to bring home these service members to families that have been waiting for 70 years. And that's really an amazing feeling to be able to give something to a family that they never thought that they would even be able to have.
Investigative and recovery missions in search of missing Americans take DPAA personnel to distant, remote, and often dangerous locations all over the globe. Rice paddies in Southeast Asia, urbanized areas on the Korean Peninsula, 16,000-foot mountaintops in the Himalayas, and underwater sites off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And we still continue to search the battlefields of World War II throughout Europe.
You know, if I could, I'd stay out here indefinitely until I could find them. And unfortunately, that's not possible. I just can't do that. But you know, if the opportunity arose where I was able to volunteer to come back out here, I would. And there's 100 different stories of where these guys might be, but the reality is that we'll continue to come out here and scour the earth for the remains.
After a successful recovery, all evidence is then transported to the DPAA laboratories. Once they've arrived in the lab, the painstaking process of identification begins. This is the final step of the mission, leading to the return of an individual. In many of the cases, an important step in the identification process is DNA analysis, which is accomplished by cutting a bone sample that is sent to the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory for sequencing. One of the challenges DPAA faces today is the lack of reference samples from family members of those still unaccounted for. Any person who is a relative of an unaccounted for American is encouraged to contact their service casualty office to ensure there is a DNA reference sample on file for that service member. DPAA makes an identification when all available evidence, remains, artifacts, and historical documents point to the same person. The ID process can take anywhere from a few months to several years to complete. Any unresolved cases are kept open with the hope that new evidence will be found or new technologies will be developed to make a future identification possible. Once an American has been identified, Their remains are returned to their family through their respective service casualty office. They are returned home with full military honors and given the respect they earned through their service and sacrifice for their country.
Oh, as a family member, this agency, to me, is doing phenomenal work, and in a very personal way, because when somebody loses somebody like my father, and you really don't know what the story is for 70 years, and then you find an agency that knows about him and keeps his memory alive, keeps the mission alive to try to find him. It's very meaningful in a very personal way, because it means you're not just doing this yourself alone. You have a whole body of people who are concerned about finding your dad and bringing him home.
The men and women of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency are united in their effort to recover and return as many of our missing personnel as possible. One more patriot return, one more family that now has answers. One more step in fulfilling our nation's promise.
Since DPA was established 3 years ago, there have been a number of noteworthy developments that I'd like to share with you. First, the nations that we work with have been amenable to initiatives that we've proposed. I was in Vietnam and Laos in March, and we're proposing to those nations some initiatives to help us become more efficient and effective. Vietnam and Laos were open and receptive to those initiatives. We have a team visiting India next week to propose to the Indian government ways to help us perform this mission in India. And today, there is an investigation team in Vladivostok, Russia. It's the first mission inside Russia in 15 years. And all of that speaks to the cooperation we get and that understanding of this humanitarian nature of this effort from our host nation partners. We're also expanding our capacity and capabilities, working with public-private partnerships. Today, there is a East Carolina University team in Saipan helping us with World War II sites there. We partner the University of Maryland and the University of Innsbruck on a World War II crash site in Austria. And we're working with Scripps Oceanographic Institute outside of San Diego on some underwater surveys and underwater recovery missions. We continue to make progress with our case management system as well as our public portal. This is utilizing the latest in information technology to include cloud-based computing, whatever that means. But it's a high-speed, interactive ability to communicate amongst ourselves, but also to communicate with you on your loved one's case. So you'll see some exciting things as we continue to field both of those systems, shooting for a December completion. There are 8,300 unknowns buried in a U.S. cemetery somewhere in the world. We continue to streamline that disinterment process. We continue to improve ways of identifying those unknowns. This year alone, we will disinter 100 from the American Cemetery in Manila, 100 from the VA Cemetery in Honolulu, and 75 throughout Europe from American cemeteries there. This is important. These 8,300, while they may be on U.S.-controlled soil, are still unknowns, and we owe it to them and to you to try to identify them. And lastly, this mission enjoys great interest, increasing interest and support from our U.S. Congress. And we're thankful again to Andrew and Stacy for representing Congressman Massey as well as Senator McConnell. This year alone, Congress added $15 million to our budget. So we're very grateful to the Congress for helping us help you find your loved one. There are 3 imperatives that I think is important to share with you. Number one, this remains a high priority for the Department of Defense, not just in resources, but also in the staunch commitment that DoD has to this mission. Secondly, and you'll meet some of them today, we have over 720 of the most talented, dedicated, passionate people I've ever encountered in my 34-year career in the military and now as a civilian in DPAA. And each of them brings that talent, that devotion, that passion to their job each and every day. And as you saw in the video, there's some very remote, austere places that we send our men and women. And lastly, I talked about the respectful partnerships that we have with our host nations. We are dependent upon their cooperation, as you can well imagine. We work with 46 of them. There are two outliers. Number one is Cambodia, and unfortunately that was a recent occurrence last fall where the Cambodians suspended cooperation with the United States. And they did so not because of this, but because of some sanctions and some tension between the United States and Cambodia. We're hoping that this year we're able to restore cooperation with the Cambodians. And lastly, for some of you, North Korea. The last time we were operating in North Korea was in 2005. I can tell you, as you all have read in the newspaper, as well as seen on the television, hopefully, our president and the leader of the North Korean government will meet on June 12th. I can assure you that our mission of recovering unknowns, and there are about 5,300 north of the demilitarized zone that we estimate. We are in close communication with the White House, with the Department of Defense, and with the Department of State that this mission needs to be part of that dialogue. That is a humanitarian mission, and one that the North Koreans need to live up to their international obligation, as most nations do. And to date, we continue to enjoy at least an understanding within the United States government of the importance of communicating that to the North Koreans to do two things. Number one, to return and repatriate the remains of what we estimate to be about 200 that we believe they're holding, but also to allow us to resume and negotiate with them on operating within North Korea, just as we did for 10 years between 1996 and 2005. There is no way any of us can fathom the loss that you have experienced. And there's no way for any of us to understand what a void it's caused in your life, the life of your parents, your siblings, your grandparents. But for us, we draw strength from the fact that the United States government is vigorously pursuing making that right. It is a humanitarian mission, but it is also one that demands our very best. And it's one that I can assure you and pledge to you that the men and women of the Department of Defense that are committed, passionate about this mission, will provide to you. Because of the circumstances, because we sent your loved one off to war as a nation, because he or she paid the ultimate sacrifice. This is why it is a sacred mission, and this is why it is a moral imperative that we go about, again, giving you our very best to ensure we provide you the answers and or hopefully bring your loved one back home. God bless you all. God bless this shared desire that we have, and as always, may God bless the United States of America.
All right, folks, so next up, what we're going to do is a remembrance ceremony. Now, the remembrance ceremony, you can look up on your slide or look at your program on the back side. We would ask that you use that as the format. This is your chance to tell a little bit about your missing loved one. Now, the rules of engagement will be we have two microphones. just please raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. That way everyone can hear your message about your loved one.
Hello, I'm Pamela Denius Gillum. I am the grandniece of Staff Sergeant Willard Melvin Christensen. He served in the United States Army Air Forces. He was in the 331st Bombardment Squadron, 94th Bombardment Group, 8th Air Force. He was aboard the Miss Donna May II. Today is the 74th anniversary of when he became an MIA.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Bass. I'm from Noblesville, Indiana. I'm here to represent my uncle, Technical Sergeant Fred Turgeon. He was a radio man and waist gunner on B-24, the Vulgar Virgin. Flew out of Benghazi, Libya on August 1st, 1943, coming up on 75 years ago. The plane was lost over Ploiesti. Pilot brought the plane down in a crash landing. The crew had bailed out. Pilot survived, spent the rest of the war POW. My uncle and the remainder of the crew were lost. Never found the remains. Happy to be here today. God bless America.
My name is Roger Goranson. I'm the nephew of Ensign Reuben I. Goranson, who served on the USS Natoma Bay in the Pacific Theater. 74 years, 3 months ago, he took off on a reconnaissance flight, flying a TBM Avenger. He reported engine failure, and then it went blank. And the Navy, including his brother, who was on a nearby, my other uncle, who was on a nearby plane, or ship, searched for him and could not find him, ever. And unfortunately, he came into the hands of the Japanese, who held him prisoner for 3 months. And then with the end of the war, they wanted to cover up their atrocities, so they murdered him, and his remains were lost. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Susan Schumacher, and this is my sister Cindy. We live just across the river, and our dad was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He died on June 10th of 1965. So I was 2 and she was 3. There was also 6 other men who died with him. And for people who have the opportunity to talk to family members of people who are missing, so many men have talked to us about our dad, and he was an only child. So it has filled in so many gaps for us, and I just really appreciate those people who can step up and say, hey, we knew him, and we want to tell you what we know about him. So we appreciate those people who do that and continue to do that. And he was a helicopter pilot, and you know, this is a great opportunity for all of us. Thanks.
If everyone would, I apologize for not standing. I'm in a wheelchair. My name is Harold Allen Markey, Jr. I'm the son of Harold Allen Markey, Sr. He was a corporal in the Army Marine, and let's see, he was with the 3rd Battalion, 160th Infantry, the 40th Infantry Division. Now, he was at first initially listed as MIA, and then later with information they received, they said that he was KIA. Nevertheless, he was in the demilitarized zone towards the end of the Korean War, and unfortunately, that area has not been able to be searched during those times. We hope that those of you that are missing your relatives have the opportunity to be able to greet them and bring them home. Unfortunately, in my lifetime, I don't think that we'll be able to get those from the DMZ. But I pray that someday my kids or my grandkids will be able to see their grandfather come home. Thank you all with the military for what you have done. Thank you for what you are doing, and in the future, what you are attempting to do. I know that everyone here hopes and continues to hope that you and their loved one will be able to someday come to them and say, here we are. Thank you very much for your help and your efforts.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Reeves. I am niece of Private Omer James Simmons, who was in the Army in Papua New Guinea, Company G, 2nd Battalion, 126th Infantry, 3rd Division. Uncle Omer was missing in action January the 3rd, 1943. That's 75 years ago. The Army and all the records say that he was on a river, washed away into the sea. But the family has a letter that says he was buried. As family historian, when I got that letter, I thought it's strange that he's buried. And as I have done research, he may have been buried in a mass grave. So therefore, this wonderful organization now is disinterring, and lots of DNA has been sent to Hawaii. So hopefully one of those big graves will find my Uncle Omer. Thank you, DPAA.
Good morning. My name is Jerome McAtee. I'm the nephew of Private First Class Charles Henry McAtee. First, I would like to thank DPPA for getting in touch with me a few years ago requesting DNA because of the circumstances. My uncle was, after I got the picture of the map, 60 miles from China, the Yalu River. He was in the headquarters battery 503rd Field Artillery Battalion, 2nd Infantry. So he was right up there, a stone's throw from China. And then when I saw the place on the map, and with the recent events, yes, I'm praying that the doors will say open up again, that several sites up in the North Korea can be opened up, that his body or remains shall be returned. He had lost his brother, I think, a week prior to. So this, is, to me, a time that, it can bring closure to this situation. But truly, I want to thank each and every representative, each and every professional that's involved, the military. I wasn't in the military. All my family was. I wasn't. I was on the back end supporting. But truly, I thank each and every one who's had their hand in bringing all our loved ones home. Thank you.
I'm Robert Glenn Hall. I am here as the nephew of Captain Robert T. Hall. He was in the Army Air Corps in the 487th Bombardment Group. On January the 18th of 1945, he disappeared while flying a P-51 on a weather reconnaissance mission, we think, over the North Sea.
I'm Kevin Hinton, nephew of Sergeant Willard Buster Matthew Gibson, Army, Korea. He was with Company E, 2nd Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, 2nd ID. He went missing on December 1st, 1950, died in Camp 5, June 21st, 1951. There were remains sent back in 1954, and we're hoping those remains that just got disinterred last month will at least somebody will know who those remains are if it's not my uncle.
Pat O'Donnell, brother-in-law of Major Gregory Crossman. Greg was a Phantom pilot. He was shot down in North Vietnam in the spring of 1968. Approximately 45 years later, they found the crash site, and I'd like to thank the people that worked there. I understand it was a very dangerous area because the crash site was so vertical, and so they found and gave my wife closure. I would also thank them. At the last meeting we were at, I asked something about my uncle killed in World War II, and thankfully they gave me enough information that I learned a lot about my uncle. Thank you.
My name is Scott Ward. I'm the grandnephew of Private Richard Ward, who was lost near the Hertigan Forest in November of 1944. I am honored to be able to donate my DNA to help bring his remains back to the great state of Indiana. Thank you.
I'm Sharon Spoladora. I'm a grandniece of Byrd Hensley Jr. He was a staff sergeant in the Air Force. He was an MIA, and then they listed him as a POW, and he was on one of the marches in Korea, and he died along the way. And they're fairly sure they might have an idea where he was buried from interviews, but we can't go there yet, so hopefully one day we will be able to. And thank you for all your efforts. It's an honor to know you guys care.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Buell. I'm the Gold Star surviving son of Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Richard Buell, who was shot down over North Vietnam on 17 September 1972. I was 5 years old. I've been to many of these family updates, and I just want to acknowledge everyone here for your strength and courage to be here today. It's not easy to come here. I almost didn't come again today. It's been a while. But I just wanted to recognize the fact that this team hasn't given up. It's been almost 46 years. We keep getting close. They've dug on the site where we think Dad went down. They didn't find anything, unfortunately, so now we're in the process of maybe disinterring the remains of the man he was flying with, who they did recover. Just like to say, welcome back to the team, Mr. McKeague. Appreciate the fact that you're back part of DPAA. And everyone, don't give up hope. You'll get an answer here eventually. Thank you.
I'm Dale Howard. This is my sister, Kathy. We are a niece and nephew of Seaman First Class Elmo Howard, and he was on the USS Arizona that went down in Pearl Harbor. As far as we know, he is still there. We just kind of like to know that exactly where he is, and pretty much hope that he stays there.
Good morning. My name's Randy Brown. I'm the nephew of Kenneth Lee Green. My uncle Kenneth, obviously I didn't know him. He died before I was born. He was wounded in North Korea in 1950, and he died in Camp 5 in January 1951. I have his Bible and an old beat-up dog tag that was on his body when he died, taken and given to my grandparents by a fellow POW. I used to work for a major airline, and we brought a lot of these soldiers home through this organization, and I appreciate that. So there is hope, and that's our hope, too, that not only our uncle comes home, but everybody else does, too.
Hello, I'm Ernest Rucker, excuse me, here with my sister.
Our father was shot down in Vietnam, a member of 12th Aero Commando Ranch Hand, on May 24th, 1968. Body was not recovered. He was listed as MIA for several years, then changed to killed in action. And don't know if any remains will ever be recovered after reading the reports. But I do go to the ranch hand reunions that they have every year. And you learn by going to visit with the people that he flew with. Little details, like the commanding general approached me at the first meeting I was at. He says, "A lot of the guys here don't remember your dad. He was too much of a gentleman to be a ranch hand." You know, but I know he got in a lot of Boo-Ray games over there. Anyway, thank you very much for the efforts. I've gone to a couple of these meetings, and they're very informative. Thank you, sir.
Hello, I'm Carrie Lawrence. I'm the niece of First Lieutenant Jack Kelly. He was in the Army Air Corps, and he was a bombardier on a B-17. And he was killed before I was born, but my uncle's family loved him very much. They talked about him a lot. I wish they were here to hear this. I'm grateful. Thank you.
My name is Jack Duvall. My brother Dean Duvall, or Marvin Duvall, pardon me, and my sister Kay Martinez is here. We represent my brother Dean Duvall, who was on a AC-47 with the 4th Air Commando Squadron. They flew out of Da Nang on March the 13th, 1966. It was to be a 5-hour flight over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. The wreckage was found in 1997, and then the excavation was started in 2010. It continued in 2011, was not done in 2012, but back in 2013 and again in 2014. The crash site was completely excavated. All remains were returned. Material evidence was also returned, but there was only one biological remains that was found for the loadmaster. There were 7 on the aircraft. The other 6, no remains were found in the complete excavation of the crash site. So it's not known what happened to the biological remains, whether they were taken by the local villagers and hoping for compensation or what is yet to be determined, but no remains were found after completely excavating the crash site. I thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Susan Scott, and I brought my son Seth with me today. I'm the niece of Private First Class John C. Westfall Jr. He was a Marine, and he entered the service on February 20th, 1943, and was with Company A, 1st Battalion, 8th Marine Regiment, and they were trying to take an island in Tarawa. And his craft had to offload in the water because they couldn't get up to the island. And he was shot before he reached land. I'm here on behalf of my mom and my aunt, who are his remaining siblings. And our hope is that his remains are found in their lifetime. And if not, then I will carry the torch, and if not, my son will. And I appreciate everything DPAA is doing. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Genevieve Palm. This is my sister Rosa Combs. We represent PFC Burton J. McQueen. He was our uncle, our mother's brother. And he was in the 141st, 36th Division of the U.S. Army. He was cut off from his division in his squadron in the Vosges Mountains of France, November 23rd, 1944. He was listed as MIA, later KIA. No remains ever identified, listed as unrecoverable. Our grandmother never forgot. She grieved as long as she lived, and she lived for nearly 30 years. And our mother as well. And I call it in our family a legacy of grief that's been handed down. And we've never forgotten, and we never will. Make sure that our children don't. And it's been wonderful to know that the U.S. military will never forget either. And I thank you so much for this day.
I think most of us, our hearts are beating out of our chest. My name is Margie Mahar. I am the baby sister of Private First Class Roland Bowser, who was a prisoner of war, captured November 2nd, 1950 in North Korea. I am honored to be representing my family of 8 children. There are 3 of us left. And I had 5 brothers, 4 of who served in the military, and only 1 that didn't come home. I just wanted to share my heart to how grateful I am. It was just about 15 years ago that the government finally found our family. And my brother and I had our DNA taken, and that gave us great hope. Our first meeting was in Washington, D.C., probably 14, 15 years ago. We were blown away by what we heard and what we continue to hear. This is probably now our 3rd meeting. But what I wanted to just share very briefly, several years ago, I was able to meet some young South Koreans who came to the United States to go to school. And I was sharing with another friend that was close by how excited we were about what was happening over there. And one young man stopped in his tracks and looked right at me, and he said, "Thank you." And I said, "Thank you?" He said, "Yes, it's because of your brother's sacrifice that we are here, and we are so grateful." And so you all need to hear that as well. And thank you so much for what you're doing. I will be reporting back to my 90-year-old brother and my 81-year-old brother about our meeting today. So just thank you so much.
I'm here in representation of my brother, Daniel Manasco, who was in the infantry on a mission in Burma, gave it all at Missional, a little airstrip that they were trying to secure for supplies in northern Burma. And the least I can say for myself and for my family, we appreciate everything that has happened to us because he gave his life. And we were sitting here talking. Do you want to say something? Do you want to do something? Folks, let's do what they did. My brother gave it all in mission all. And I'm asking you, as fellow citizens, as Americans, and dedicated patriotic people, to stand for what we stand for as a country today, forever. Thank you very much for your services. And it takes a little bit, like we said, a little bit of guts to get up and say something like this. But you know, they gave all of theirs up. I want to thank you. Have a good day.
Good morning. I'm Marilyn Reich from Fishers, Indiana, and I'm here because my cousin Bill, William Dooling, he was a young man from Connecticut. He was the family namesake and an only child. Bill served in World War II as a gunner on a B-24. And I want to thank you for all the information you've given us on the mission he was on and the men he flew with. Bill was only 21 years old. There were 3 Bills on the plane. One is buried in Colorado, one is buried in Audains, and our Bill is on the wall of missing in Cambridge, and we'd like to bring Bill home.
All right, folks, thank you so much for sharing. And I also want to highlight that today, we have one more? Okay.
Hi, my name is Bob Martin. This is my wife, Paula, and we're here on behalf of my brother, Jerry Dean Martin. Jerry was running on a LCU, a landing craft utility, running from Da Nang to Tamai, South Vietnam. And November the 3rd of 1970, it was found capsized. From there, we've got a listing of MIA. 1 year later, with no information, we got a probably killed, probably no information back. So this side of heaven, we don't know. Later on, we will. And I'd like to thank this team for their efforts in recovery. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for sharing. And I do just want to highlight that today, less than 1% of the American people serve in uniform. So here's the challenge to all of us, is to make sure that we educate the other 99% about what your loved ones sacrificed for this nation, to make sure that we carry on and we honor their service. So next up, I'm really excited about our next speaker. In January of 2018, with the National League of POW MIA Families, a delegation went to Southeast Asia. And we have a family member to give a perspective, Mrs. Cindy Stonebreaker, to come up and give her perspective on the site visit.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Stonebreaker, and I am the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Stonebreaker. And on October 28, 1968, my father left U Dorn Airfield in Thailand for a solo night reconnaissance mission over North Vietnam, and he never returned. This October will be 50 years. And growing up, this was something we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about it at home, and we certainly didn't talk about it in public. Shortly after my father went missing, we relocated to a small little hippie town in Northern California. Half the town didn't know we were at war, and the other half was totally against it. So I grew up feeling alone, abandoned, like nobody cared, and that my dad had been forgotten. But over the next 40 years, I had a couple really cool things happen. I actually met a man that was wearing my dad's bracelet. And a couple years later, I met a man on an airplane that I wasn't even supposed to be on, that turned out to be the air traffic controller that had given my dad permission to take off on the mission he didn't return from. But 7 years ago, I started on a journey. And it wasn't a journey that I had planned, because as far as I knew, this was something we didn't deal with. I was driving into Tennessee, and I stopped at a rest stop, and there were 7 Rolling Thunder members hoisting the POW MIA flag. And after they got done, I walked up to them, and I told them that my dad was still missing in Vietnam. And they embraced me, which was pretty scary at a rest stop. But they told me that I was the reason that they did what they did. It was for me and families like me that they kept this going, and that my dad had not been forgotten. And it just happened to be a couple months later, there was a regional family update in Nashville, Tennessee. So I attended my first meeting, and I was overwhelmed to be sitting in a room full of people that had missing loved ones like I did. And like you will notice here in a little bit, you are going to be given a ton of information. And I didn't know what to do with it all, and I didn't even know what to ask. But just knowing that I was in a room full of people like me really changed things for me. Several months after that, I received a phone call from Rolling Thunder where they invited me to attend an event they call The Ride Home in Americus, Georgia. And I'm like, so you want me to take off with a bunch of bikers and go to Georgia? That made no sense to me. But I had this gut feeling that I needed to go. And I couldn't find anybody to go with me. So I got in my car and I drove to Georgia. And there I met 7 other MIA children. I met 7 other people just like me, and I didn't know there was anybody else like me. And that trip forever changed my life. Because of that trip, I've now been able to spend the last 5 Father's Days in Washington, D.C. at the Vietnam Memorial Wall, where we've stopped at every daddy's name, because you're with a group of people that you know completely understand what the meaning of that name etched in stone is. I also have now all of my dad's military records, and he now has a memorial marker at Arlington. And about that same time, I found the reel-to-reel tapes that my mom and dad sent back and forth, and I had them put on CD. And so I have 6 minutes of my father talking directly to me about how proud he is of me, what a great job I was doing of coloring, and for me just to always do my best. As it turned out, he mailed that tape on the way to the mission he didn't come home from. I've also had the opportunity to meet 3 men that served with him at the time of the incident. And one of them was my father's pilot's roommate at the time. And as we were walking into a banquet, he asked me how I liked my dollhouse. My birthday was 10 days before my dad went missing, and that year my dad sent me a dollhouse from Thailand, and he was with him when he bought it. He said my dad was very particular about which one I got, and that buying that dollhouse was the one moment of normalcy in a world of chaos. In 2015, I was elected to sit on the board of directors for the National League of POW MIA Families in Washington, D.C. And that appointment changed my focus. My focus then now isn't just the fate of my father and his pilot, but on the now 1,598 still unaccounted for in Vietnam. And I've had the opportunity to participate and learn all aspects of this mission. In October, I received a phone call saying that I had been chosen to represent the families on an official league delegation trip to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. And I'll be honest, I had never thought to do that. It had never crossed my mind to go over there. I was also informed on that call of the very large out-of-pocket expense, being that we were all paying our own way. And being a single mom, I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. But I also realized this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me that may never come again. So with the help of a lot of people who helped donate, on January 11th, I boarded a plane by myself to Bangkok, Thailand, where I was to meet with the rest of my delegation. The delegation included Ann Mills Griffith, who's chairman and CEO of the National League of POW MIA Families, and Richard Childress, the former National Security Advisor to Reagan and League advisor. The purpose of this trip was to meet with government officials for continued and expanded support, the turning over of any archival documentation, and the access to living eyewitnesses to help bring our unreturned veterans home. This was a trip that was highly planned through DPAA and our embassies there. It wasn't a just jump on the airplane and fly over there. But it did not take me very long after getting there to realize that this was not going to be a sightseeing trip. I have about 700 pictures on my camera. 90% of them were taken out of the window of a moving vehicle. We spent most of our days at our American embassies with our American teams and with our DPAA attachments in those countries. But the highlight of my trip was not drinking tea in the Prime Minister's office or eating dinner in the formal dining room at the personal residence of our ambassador. The highlight of my trip was I got to spend several days on an excavation site on top of a mountain in the jungles of rural Laos. And that portion of the trip was a 1.5 hour air flight and a 9-hour drive in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, most of which was on a dirt road. And I used that lightly because a large portion of the road that we were on wasn't much bigger than a footpath. And we crossed a very large river without a bridge. And we were traveling on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, for the last 5 years, I've participated in the updates in Washington for Vietnam, and I had seen all the slideshows. We didn't have the wonderful video that you just saw here, but all the slideshows that I had seen, I really thought I knew what was going on. I'd seen the slides. When I got up to the top of that mountain, I was immediately touched by what I saw. I saw 2 complete villages working aside our American team. One of the sites that I was on was a F-4 site, which is the same kind of plane my dad was flying. And it was a very large site. And they had been to that site multiple times. But when I got there, I watched them. And they had a 4x4 square. And they would take 1 shovel of dirt, and that dirt would go in a bucket. And that bucket would get passed around by the allow teams that were there till it got to the screening area. And each bucket then was screened. And there was 1 American for every 3 screens, and nothing got dumped out of that screen till it was looked at. And anything that wasn't a rock, that was the size of your pinky nail, were turned over to the archaeologist to be bagged and documented to go to the lab. As it turned out, I wasn't far away from where they think my dad's site might be, on the other side of the border in Vietnam. And I had a chance to sit there and look over. And I knew I was standing on land that my father had flown over hundreds of times. I didn't get closure on that mountain, but I left there with a peace. One of the things that those slides don't show is the thousands of hours that are put in going through archival documents, talking to witnesses, surveying sites, working with the locals, and the sheer logistics of getting teams up to some of these sites. And while I sat there, one of the things that kept going through my mind was, they're not just here. They're doing this all over the world. I grew up thinking nobody cared. The other thing you don't see in those slides is the passion and dedications of the guys that are on the ground. It was hot. And there's a lot of jobs that these guys could do that they could make more money and not be in dangerous situations. But there wasn't one team member that I talked to that you could not feel the passion about this job. They take it serious. So I left there with a peace, knowing that my dad hadn't been forgotten. So for DPAA, thank you so much for what you're doing. I grew up thinking nobody cared, and knowing all that's going into 50 and 70 years later, I can't even describe. To the family members here, take advantage of the fact that you have this opportunity. To the new ones here, it's a lot of information, but there's a lot of us here that have been through this before. Talk to us, we're here. Ask the questions. I can't think of another government agency that allows you access to their top people. You have access to the people from the lab. You have access to the director. You have access to your casualty officers. I can't think of another agency that allows you that access. So take advantage of it, and take advantage of the fact that you're in a room full of other families who completely understand what you're going through. To our Vietnam veterans and World War II veterans in here, I'd like to say welcome home. And to all of our active military and those who have served since Vietnam, I'd like to say thank you. Because if the next generation wasn't willing to stand up and serve, then everything that my dad did, and every family and every person represented in this room, their efforts would have been for nothing. Thank you.
Okay, so now for a quick shift, I want to invite from Senator McConnell's office, Field Representative Andrew Condia to read a note from the senator.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Senator McConnell and our team, and I'll echo, I'm sure Congressman Massey and his team feel the same way. It's truly an honor to be here this morning. Thank you all for letting us spend a little time with you this morning and just get a better understanding of what an important bit of work goes on here this morning. So thank you. On behalf of Senator McConnell, I'd just like to read a short note. Without further ado, I'll quickly get to that. So to the families gathered here today, the debt that we owe our nation's service members and their families is beyond measure, particularly for those we have lost or who are still missing in action. Each morning, the National League of Families, POW, MIA flag, is posted in front of my office in our nation's capital, serving as a powerful and constant reminder of our American warfighters who've yet to come home. While they may not be back in our arms, not a day has passed that those loved ones haven't remained in our minds and our hearts. Last November, just before Veterans Day, I was honored to help dedicate a commemorative chair in the U.S. Capitol to remember American prisoners of war and those still missing in action. It serves as an ever-present witness to lawmakers that the wounds of war will never fully heal until all of our sons and daughters, including more than 1,300 unaccounted for Kentuckians, are found. The chair also stands in preparation for our future. We have a seat of honor ready for their triumphant homecoming. I'd like to thank the DPAA for their diligent care and service to bring our loved ones home. With professionalism and compassion, they serve as a bright glimmer of hope during the most difficult of circumstances. In Congress, we're trying to do our part to support this work. You may be interested to learn, and I know it's already been alluded to, that the most recent government funding legislation, Congress designated an additional $15 million above what the President had requested to help the DPAA continue and expand their important efforts. It's my sincere hope that today's forum may provide both information and comfort to you and your family. On behalf of all Americans, thank you for your sacrifice and supporting our nation's service members and their mission to defend our freedom. If my office or my staff can ever be of assistance to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Sincerely, Mitch McConnell. Thank you all very much.
All right. Is Cindy still in the room? Thank you very much, Cindy, for your remarks. Wow, spot on. All right, folks, now what we'll do, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break. So at 10:35, if I could have, or at 10:30, if I could have everyone seated back down, we will then go into our set of briefings, and we'll start with our policy and plans update. So at this time, let's please go ahead and take a 15-minute break. All right, folks, if I could have everyone take their seats, please, we'll go ahead and begin with the next set of briefings. And next up to provide a policy and plans briefing is Mr. Jack Cole.
So, thank you, Todd. Can everyone hear me? We'll make sure. We're good? We're good? Okay. Can everyone see me? I'm a bit of a pacer, and I'm always afraid to be up on a podium because I'm afraid I'm going to pace myself and fall off and fall flat on my face, which would be embarrassing. So can everyone see me? We good? All right. Thank you. Again, just a quick personal note before I begin. For longer than I care to admit, damn near 30 years, I've worn a MIA bracelet of 3 U.S. Army Special Forces personnel who were lost on a covert recon mission in Laos in March of 1968. The brother of one of those men, Greg Houston, his brother John, was here this morning, unfortunately had to leave. So it's an extra special treat, not just for Armed Forces Day, but to be able to be here to see John and to rekindle a friendship with John, and hopefully we'll get his brother home soon. But anyway, I'm with the Policy and Plans Directorate at our headquarters in Washington. We like to call this portion of the morning, my briefing, POW MIA 101. For those of you who are first-timers, think of it as like the 30,000-foot level of the mission and the issues we address. For those of you who have been here before, hopefully you'll pick up some new information. So I'm going to break it into 3 sections, sort of like 3 little segments. First is going to be, again, that 30,000-foot overview, some of the key actors in the U.S. government and our partners that we deal with. Second part is going to be the role of policy, not just my directorate, the Policy and Plans Directorate, but policy in general. And then finally, a very brief overview of each of the conflicts that we are responsible for. Now, in the afternoon, you're going to have your breakout sections, so I'm not going to steal their thunder, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor so that when you go into the afternoon sessions, you've got a little bit more background. All right, some takeaways, key takeaways that I ask that you folks to keep in mind. Number one, the magnitude of the task before us. Secondly, the fact that each of the conflicts is different and how we approach pursuing your loved ones is different. And third, you're going to hear me talk about archives, records preservation, and archival information. You're probably going to get sick of hearing me talk about that today, but the importance that those archives and that information plays. Very quickly, the U.S. government's past conflict personnel accounting community and our partners. Obviously, DPAA, you're going to get a briefing later this morning on the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, the role that DNA plays, the important role that DNA plays in this identification process, the critical role with each passing day, an even greater role. Very quickly, the service casualty officers, you all have met your SCOs, as we call them, service casualty officers. They are your interface between you and all this and all this. I could spend my entire briefing on this slide. Mercifully for you, I won't, but a couple of things very quickly. Department of State. Now, as Mr. McCaig said, we are in 46 countries, almost 50 countries. We have detachments in Southeast Asia and in Europe. So those areas where we don't have detachments, we rely on the State Department, our State Department partners, our ambassadors, our country teams, our defense attachés, to carry our water in those countries where we don't have a detachment. We could not do this job without their active support. And I can tell you, every country where we work, where we have to coordinate and liaison with our State Department colleagues, the support is absolutely outstanding and tremendous. It is a whole of government process. Intelligence community. Obviously, we don't speak of intelligence sources and methods in an open forum, obviously. However, just let me make it very clear, and you may be assured that when the circumstances arise and when we need to, we have full access to the complete range of the United States' intelligence assets. And finally, right down here, you'll note the word partner. NGOs, non-government organizations. Mr. McCaig spoke of them, especially in World War II. We're making great progress taking those universities and other entities that can bring a special talent to this mission. We like to call them force multipliers because while they're doing that work, for example, in Europe or in the Pacific, that frees up some of our organic assets to work some of the more dangerous or difficult sites elsewhere in the world. All right. This is the task before us. Approximately 82,400 Americans are still unaccounted for or otherwise missing from World War II forward. The vast majority, as you can see, the Pacific, Vietnam, Korea, and then World War II. We need to take that number, however, and put it in perspective. And I call your attention to these numbers right here. These are the overwater losses, primarily deep water losses. The chances of recovering those remains, I regret to say, are remote. Now, you take that 82,400, you subtract out, this number is a little over 40,000. You take out that number, and that gives us somewhere in the neighborhood of 34,000 to 35,000 that we believe are potentially recoverable. Operative word is potentially recoverable. The importance that we place on building case files and such to be able to put together a file. We call it potentially recoverable because we've got something to work with. We've got an eyewitness report, that little French boy who was 5 years old when that B-17 went down. Or we've got the American veteran who was in the helicopter when the team was ambushed on the ground. Or we've got a wingman, or we've got an after-action report that says, I think the plane went in here. Got something we can build a case file with. Because with this amount of men still unaccounted for, we just can't throw spaghetti against the wall. We have to have something to work with to be able to say, we think we can go to that spot, and that's where he is. All right, so that was sort of the first section of my 3 sections, policy. What is policy? Well, you can, strategic plans and everything, you can read that, but policy is in one sense a very nebulous concept. And as I struggled to put this briefing together, it's like, how can I explain it? So my buddy and my colleague back in Washington said, well, Jack, use the arrow analogy. I said, okay, Harry, what's the arrow? Well, think of the mission as an arrow. So at the tip of the spear, at the tip of the arrow, are those wonderful men and women out there on those recovery teams or on those investigation teams in Laos or in Papua New Guinea. And then you've got behind them, you've got the analysts and the historians, you've got the magnificent people in the lab doing the DNA, you've got the outreach, Todd's outreach and communication people putting these things together, getting the word out. You've got the expeditionary support people that make all of that possible, those teams in the field. And here, my friend Harry said, and Jack, policy, well, we're the fletching on the arrow. I said, great, Harry, thank you so much. Harry, what's a fletching? It's the material on the end of an arrow that gives it the direction and the stability. So at the end of the day, policy enables operations. All right, so how does that, let's bring this down. How does that impact you, okay? Disinterment of unknowns. Now this is for the World War II and Korea families. There are no unknowns from Vietnam. How we go about doing disinterments is policy. Now the Korea and World War II families, the afternoon breakout, you're going to get a very detailed briefing on our disinterment process. So I'm not going to steal their thunder. But how we do disinterments is policy. The categorization. When we merged our organizations back in 2015, the different wars, each war had a different designation. Each war had different definitions. And it was very confusing. Someone told me at one point we had something like 100 different definitions between the various wars. We took that and we put it into those 4. So that with that, we can prioritize our research, we can prioritize resources, we can prioritize identifications, and we can also for family expectations. Now, it may not seem like a big thing, but it's important to you, the families. The boss, Mr. McCaig, spoke of our web enhancement and the case management system, so I won't belabor that. Policy gaps, real quick. We took 3 different organizations and merged them. Those organizations don't exist. But some of those organizations could do things, but now that they don't exist. So we have to draft the policy that gives us the authority to do some of these different things. Key policy functions. Negotiate, and right here, now this is, we were in, as Mr. McCaig said, we were in Vietnam in Southeast Asia in March. That's the boss with who will be the next Vietnamese ambassador to the United States. Down here, that's just earlier this month. We had a delegation from the Chinese People's Liberation Army in town. So we do all that, but I want to spend just a moment on this interagency coordination and representation. Every time a senior member of the United States government, and I'm talking, we start at the top, the President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, anytime a senior U.S. government official meets with a host nation counterpart, our responsibility is to put together the talking points to make sure that the equities of this issue reach the President, reach the Secretary of Defense, reach the Secretary of State. Not just at Mr. McCaig's level, at the muckamuck level, but at the AO level, at my level, working with my counterparts over at the Asia Pacific in the five-sided bill here at the Pentagon, at the State Department, and over at the National Security Council, so that it all goes up, so that our equity, so that this mission is carried forward at the highest levels of this government. All right, that's the second section done. Very quickly, the individual conflicts. World War II, 73,000 still unaccounted for. As you remember from that earlier slide, a lot of them from the Pacific, again, over water losses. World War II challenges, it was a world war. There are Americans unaccounted for literally every corner of the globe. That alone is a daunting challenge. Witnesses are dying. Those of you old enough in this room to remember, how did we make copies back in the good old days? You had two pieces of paper, you had the carbon paper. And then if you were like me, if you put the carbon paper in backwards, you screwed everything up. But those documents, they're fading away. We're in the process of scanning thousands of documents, World War II men still unaccounted for, so that we will always have that record. As I said, we have to have information, that records, to build the case files. Korea, 7,702 guys still unaccounted for. As Mr. McCaig said, approximately 5,300 north of the DMZ. Now, I'm not going to go into any, Mr. McCaig talked about the president is scheduled to meet Kim Jong-un next month. I'm not going to go any further than that. We'll see what comes out of that meeting. I don't want to say it's a good news, bad news story, but for the Korean War families, all right, 5,300 still north of the DMZ. We have approximately 1,300 U.S.-Korean War remains in American custody on American soil. Approximately 800 in the Punch Bowl, unknowns. When we were doing missions in North Korea from 1996 to 2005, we have about 230. And then in the early 90s, the North Koreans turned over approximately 208 caskets. That's the K208 Korean families. You may have heard that phrase. But together, there's 1,300 U.S. remains in our custody that the lab is working to identify. So, can't get into North Korea, but we're still pursuing Korean War accounting. MACRI, South Korea, Ministry of National Defense Agency for Killed in Action, Recovery, and Identification. In essence, South Korea's DPAA. As a matter of fact, some of the people in this room, and I don't see Johnny Webb, but Johnny was instrumental 11 years ago in helping the South Koreans stand up MACRI. We have a tremendous relationship with MACRI working together. They know that if they find remains that are not Asian, they know what to do, they know to call us. Great relationship. The challenge in North Korea, the final challenge, getting into the north. And as I said, I'm not going to speculate. All that's way beyond my pay grade. But let me tell the Korean War families, you may be assured that our analysts, both in Washington and in Hawaii, are not just sitting on their hands. They have been working Korean War cases since 2005. And if we get the high sign from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we will be able to step out and smartly execute missions in the north. All right, Vietnam, 1,598 still unaccounted for. In one sense, I've always said, you've heard me say a little while ago, time, losing witnesses. Perhaps more so in Southeast Asia, for many reasons, time is our greatest enemy. The soil in much of Southeast Asia is incredibly acidic. It's eating through remains. And unlike Korea and World War II losses, most of our losses in Southeast Asia are aircraft. And a lot of those losses are what we call the fast movers, the jets. So you've got a jet, an F-4 Phantom, he's got a full bomb load, he just topped off from his tanker, he's rolling in on a target on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and he goes into a karst ridge at 500 knots. There's not a lot left to begin with. Then you take into account the scavenging. That's both the two-legged and the four-legged kind, and the weather. The window in Southeast Asia to get those remains before they're gone is closing. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of an exit ramp here. Mr. McCaig spoke of Cambodia and the fact that they have hopefully temporarily suspended cooperation. My point is, every country where we work, we are a guest in that country. Those countries have rules, regulations, laws, procedures that we have to obey. Again, we are a guest in those countries, and sometimes those rules or regulations can be a bit onerous. And then again, that sort of comes back to policy's responsibility to get beyond those onerous rules and regulations so we can do our job. But always remember, I know some of the families are frustrated. Why can't we do this? Why can't we go there? Things like that. Again, we are at the mercy of those countries and their rules and regulations. Again, archival access. Operational flexibility, again, give us the permission, going back to the rules and regulations of a country. Give us the opportunity, if we need to extend a joint field activity by another week or 2 weeks, let us do that. If we need to bring in 100 guys on a people on a joint field activity, let us do that. Little things, but they can make the difference in being able to close a site and find remains, or having to wait until the next, the next JFA, or even sometimes the next weather window. Archival access, again. For example, using Cambodia, very quickly. The majority of our losses in Cambodia and in Laos were in areas along the Ho Chi Minh Trail that the North Vietnamese Army controlled. Where's the information? Archives, hopefully in Hanoi. All right, Cold War, over water. All but 2 over water. And again, the A word, archives. Now, as the boss, Mr. McKay, not the boss. As the boss said, we have a team in Vladivostok. If you recall from the picture a little while ago, just a couple of weeks ago, he met with a Chinese People's Liberation Army archival delegation. Again, archives. But also, although at the big policy level, U.S. relations with Russia, U.S. relations with China, but at our level, there is still that dialogue. We're meeting with our Russian counterparts. We're meeting with the Chinese counterparts. So you can take heart that what the elephants can be doing whatever they're doing up there, but at our level, we're still having a dialogue. Middle East, North Africa. We still have 6 guys unaccounted for. We have 2 from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then 3 from Iraqi Freedom, and we also have 1 from El Dorado Canyon, which you may recall back in 1986, Muammar Gaddafi sponsored the terrorist bombing of a discotheque in Germany, killed a number of Americans. We responded with an airstrike. We lost one of the FB-111s. There's still 1 guy from that loss that we're still looking for. All right, very quickly, I apologize for kind of moving so quickly, but just in summary, so kind of looked at the big picture, the key players in this accounting mission, try to give you a flavor for what policy, not just my directorate, but also policy in general, how it contributes the mission, and then looking at each of the individual conflicts. Now, I'm gonna make another personal comment here. You all got bombarded, you will be bombarded before this day is out with, we call it the fire hose effect of information. We don't, especially the new families, we don't expect you to understand all of it or to absorb all of it. There is a lot. But I leave you with this. On your way home tonight, if there is nothing that you take from this meeting today, I hope you will take and leave here knowing that to those of us privileged, and I use that word intentionally, privileged to work this mission, it is not just a job to us. It is a mission. It is a commitment, and it is a promise to you, your loved ones, that we will do everything humanly possible to bring them home or to give you the answers that you rightly deserve. So I appreciate your time and your patience, and now I'm going to be followed by Dr. Greg Berg, who is the lab director of our lab facility out in Hawaii.
Good morning, everyone. I just got promoted. That was pretty awesome. I'm actually not the lab director by any means, but I'll take the promotion. Hey, Jack, are you getting the paycheck upgrade for me as well? Yeah, oh, totally did. It was awesome. Perfect. I like it. All right, here we go. We're going to try to make up a little time, so I'm going to move pretty quick. Again, the fire hose, but let's see what happens here. That's me. That's what I am. Actually, I'm one of the lab managers out in Hawaii. So today I'm going to talk to you about 4 major things: field operations, laboratory operations, the identification process, how we actually create an identification, make an identification. We're going to use one individual as a case study on that, and then we're going to do some talking about special projects and ways forward on that. Some of the slides, they're not graphic, but there's going to be human remains shown, just FYI. Okay, here we go, field operations. We do archaeological recoveries, as you've heard, all across the world. As the director said, we've got teams in countries right now doing these operations. But the first step before we ever go into the field, as you've heard also several times today, is we do archival research. We've got huge, vast amounts of people doing archival research to figure out where we should go in the world before we ever put a shovel into the ground. Once we figure that part out, or we have a good lead, we're going to send in a team. They're going to do an investigation process. From there, we're going to send in a recovery team. The recovery team is led by an archaeologist or an anthropologist, someone that kind of looks like me, but hopefully not me. I've been doing it for far too long, my back hurts. Thank you. All right, there we go. All right, little humor today. So then that team's going to spend 35 to 60 days in the field on any one given site, and we're going to repeat that as necessary until we get the site completed. The other thing that we do is we're doing a lot more disinterments of unknowns from across the world, and you've heard that also from various speakers up here. I've done disinterments down in Manila. We got folks doing them out there in across Europe and in other locations as well. We always send an archaeologist or an anthropologist out to those, because believe it or not, 50 years in a casket, the bottoms tend to fall out. And so we actually will do a mini archaeological recovery if there is a problem with the casket being compromised, because we don't want to lose any information. So we always have folks out ready to jump in. Big takeaway from archaeology, number 1 sentence right there. It is a destructive process. We get one shot only to do it right. All the documentation, all of the mapping, all of the where did this evidence come from, we get one chance. You can never go re-dig a site. It's gone. Once you put that shovel in the ground, you are destroying the site. Based on that, we hire the best and the brightest to do that work for us. Those folks are trained in understanding spatial relationships, how to map things, how to use the latest equipment and technologies available across the spectrum. We look at site transformation processes. We look, hey, did the site change over the last 60 years? Did someone come in with a dump truck full of B-grade stuff and put it over the top of that because they're going to put a road on top of it? We look at all of these different things so that we can actually find what we're looking for. And of course, each field site, as you've seen, you guys get to see the worst of the worst. You know, sometimes we got nice little drive-to sites that you pull up and it's just a giant hole in a rice paddy. But most of the time, the sites that you guys get to see are horrible, horrible looking sites. Now, that's a site. This is a photograph off of a site. And this is what archaeologists do. They look at that, and you look at that right now, and you're like, that looks, yeah, that looks like dirt. That's dirt, right? And that's dirt. Well, but to us, that tells a story. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to say, okay, I know that middle layer right there has everything to do with the incident. Now, this one's off of a plane crash site, so I can see right there, that's decomposing metal in the sidewall, so I understand that that's part of the airplane wreckage that's there. This white circle right here is an intrusive root or a burrow. Top layer is everything that I don't care about, and the bottom layer is incident sterile. But that tells me, and that brackets what I need to know. It steers the excavation process. We read that so that we know when we're done on a site, but also where our best likelihoods for recovering evidence and the remains of your loved ones are. Here's another great one. Again, that looks like dirt. But to us, that's a burial. We can actually see, you can see this too, you can see this nice little line all the way around there. That's indicative of a disturbance process in the ground. So what happens is we look for those soil changes, and then we do something about them. We excavate that out, and here we have our missing serviceman in a field expedient burial. But it took looking at those soil changes to know where to dig. So here's some examples of spots that archaeological recoveries that we've done. Top one is a B-24 site in Papua New Guinea. And remember, I was talking about all that documentation that goes into this. We're going to make a map, which looks an awful lot like that, of where everything on that site came from. We need to ensure that we understand that so that we can put together a package that's cohesive. That B-24 maybe likely had 12 guys on it. Did 3 of them bail out? We can figure that out based on where we recover evidence across the site from. Did 2 of them bail out? Did none of them bail out? Did they all write it in? We can figure that out based on those site associations. If we didn't do this, we might not ever know who was on board that aircraft, right? This is another example of a very difficult site in, I think that one's in Laos. But again, you can see a nice grid system. That grid system allows us to map everything into place, to retain provenience, and retain how we collect the evidence. We work all over the world. We work in different types of environments. Top one, the burial that I showed you earlier, was actually uncovered by a little machine that kind of looked like that in Germany. So we use mechanical equipment to strip off the stuff that we don't need to see, get down into those layers that we do need to see, look for those soil changes. This is what happens when you do that same process by hand in Southeast Asia. That actually went down 2 meters or about 6 feet before we started seeing soil changes associated with an intrusive event like a burial. That's all because a river over the last 50 years overflows its banks. Deposits a little bit of sediment, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and pretty soon the actual incident time frame is buried 6 feet of soil. We can figure that out. We run everything through these screens. We don't want to miss any evidence. All of our screens are about a 1/4 inch thick. You heard that from Cindy, actually. I believe you were up here talking about watching everyone push dirt through screens. Oh my God, mind-blowingly difficult work. 8 hours a day pushing dirt through a screen, looking for that one tiny piece of evidence that might solve a case. And the really cool guys get to do that underwater. I mean, those guys are cool. I'm not that cool. So, that's for you. Field operations, again, we're going to do all of this type of work, even in cemeteries, as I alluded to before. Now, fun part, laboratory operations. We've got 2 main laboratory facilities, as you've heard. One's right around the corner from here, up there in Omaha, Nebraska. The other one's out in Hawaii. We are an accredited laboratory. There's a lot of letters up there. What it means is you can have confidence in everything that we do. We are one of the very few forensically accredited laboratories in the world for doing anthropological recovery and identification. Our accreditation just got re-upped for another 4 years. We've been doing this since about 2002. Our accreditation has been re-upped last March was when our accreditation came through. Basically, it's like having, people like to use interesting analogies of going to certain types of doctors where they use a type of thing that looks in places that you don't talk about. That's kind of the way those types of exams go for us. They look at all of our paperwork, all of our traceability, all of our evidence, all of our handling procedures, and do a thorough examination of that before they allow us to maintain our accreditation. So you can have confidence in what we do based on that accreditation. Making an identification is basically taking all of the evidence from across multiple disciplines and looking for that one little centerpiece right there. This example has 6 different circles of evidence. Sometimes we're going to have a 7th over here or an 8th. But it's when all of those circles intersect that we feel confident that we're making an identification for you. If we're missing some of these because we don't have the evidence, that's okay. But we're going to need at least 2, possibly 3 of those circles before we're going to push an ID out the door. So the big ones for us are the historical background. Again, that's that archival research. Jack talked to you a lot about archives. You're going to hear a lot of that today. We got the archaeology, which I just kind of gave you a little rundown on. Material evidence to us is all the stuff that's not biological that we use as evidence. Forensic anthropology is all the biological evidence. I don't know what I just did. There we go. DNA you're going to hear about after me. And forensic odontology is teeth, right? Okay, so the identification process begins with the archival research. We're going to get a place to go in the globe. We're going to get a spot. And then we're going to ask the question, how many different things happened near that location, and can we narrow that down? So if we're looking for a P47 at a certain spot, we want to also know how many were around there so that we can get down to our one guy. We're going to use material evidence. We're going to use like a watch pulled off of a grid, a map from the archaeology. We're going to take that watch and we're going to correlate it out to maybe someone who was wearing it. That's material evidence. We're going to do biological profiles, age, sex, ancestry, stature, trauma, individuating traits from the human skeleton. We're going to compare that with antemortem data. So everything that's in that IDPF, individual deceased personnel file. That's going to narrow us down further. We're going to look at teeth. Teeth are gold mines of information. They're magic. They're literally, if we have an antemortem radiograph, it's better than a fingerprint that we can match to. Unfortunately, that's one conflict out of the 3 that we service, and you can guess which one that is because it's the most recent. But we still have antemortem charts from, actually I think the oldest one I've seen was from 1904, that they started charting teeth way back in the day. These are also extraordinarily good for making an identification. We'll see that in a little bit. Another nice one that we have developed over the last few years is an antemortem x-ray comparison of your upper clavicles and midsection of your neck here, those vertebrae. Back in World War II, folks decided that going into the military you couldn't do if you had TB, right? Because that would get everybody else sick in your unit potentially. And you can't have units go down due to massive infections of TB. So the way they figured out whether or not you had TB is they took a chest radiograph and they looked for occlusions in that. They kept those. And then we took those, we digitized them all, and then we can take post-mortem remains, radiograph them in the same position, and then overlay them onto a 60-year-old radiograph and get an exact match. Pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. We also use DNA evidence. Now, I could stand up here and talk to you about DNA until the cows come home. Then I could have another guy named Dr. Timothy Mann come up here and tell you how I was so sadly wrong about that. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to introduce him coming up after me, and he's going to talk to you all about that. We use it. It's awesome. Okay. Run through a quick identification process for you. We're going to start at the beginning. We're going to go all the way through the end so you can see how we do what we do. There's going to be a little ticker on the bottom. Follow that for the numbers. I'll point it out right there. Here's our start number. 7,702 individuals. So in 1950, 2 companies of the 25th ID were engaged up in North Korea. Chinese forces came down. It was a big fight. Bad things happened. 63 soldiers went listed as missing in action. So, from my original number, I've already dropped it way down low. Those 63, 42 were collected at that point in time, labeled KIA, moved home. 21 individuals remained missing in action. Now this was back 1998 or so when we still had access to North Korea. So we sent a team out. And that team went to a purported burial site in a cornfield in North Korea. And a witness came up and said, they're buried, 2 guys are buried right there. And we said, are you sure? And he said, sure, I'm sure. We said, okay. So we put a shovel in the ground. And sure enough, remains of 2 individuals were right where he said they were. Top individual is this way, the bottom individual is this way. The second individual's head is under here. They were buried basically stacked. Now you can see that we're missing part of this guy right here because he was only down about 8 inches. And I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt in North Korea. Actually, you can't buy a t-shirt in North Korea. But I've been there, and they still use old-fashioned plows, literally, that have the giant blade. And the cow that pulls it, actually, usually they're buffalo, or not buffalo, water buffalo up there. And they drive that blade through the ground. So our upper guy is missing quite a bit because of those plowing activities. That's a map, simplistic sketch map of that site. And so we're going to focus on this lower individual, the most complete one. We ran out the biological profile, a male, African American descent, 17 to 19 years old, about 68.5 inches tall, which, if you think about it, that's your standard military individual, right? 17 to 21 years old, 5'8". That's, yeah. But how many fit that profile out of those missing 21? And only 6 of them did. So now I'm down to 6 individuals that we have to eliminate. Then we start looking at those gold mines of information, those teeth. And from the upper jaw, we can see that he's got a really large cavity here, and he's got both of his third molars in place. And on his lower jaw, we can see another large cavity, and another one there, but both of his molars are right there. The rest of his teeth had no fillings, no dental work done. So again, we ask the question, how many people could that match out of those 6? And there's only 1. That individual is labeled as having dental caries right there on those 2 teeth. He's labeled as missing his upper molars, but that's an explainable discrepancy because at that point in time, they didn't use x-rays to radiograph the mouth. They just did a visual examination, so those molars were unerupted. They were still covered with gum tissue, so the dentist couldn't see those. And these are present. And there's only 1 individual that matched that. So we're like, hey, we got an ID right here, right? But let's take it a step further. Let's go back to that archival record a little bit. Let's look into that, and we can find a letter from his mom that says mom underneath there. It really doesn't say mom, but you get my point. He had considerable large space between his 2 front teeth. That's called a diastema, and there it is in the remains. So his mom's letter back to the military, back in the day, helped identify him. The final coup de grace in this case was, of course, we did get DNA, and that matched his 2 sisters as well. So that's pretty much how we pull together an identification. We start with an archival research. We move through an excavation. We're going to take all the lines of evidence we possibly can. We're going to build it out so we only have 1 individual remaining. Everyone follow that? Was that pretty straightforward? Great. Cool. All right. trying to keep this short because you guys got lunch coming up and there's another speaker after me or so, but we're going to do a little special projects. And this is really talking about what we're doing in the lab and how much crazy is going on with how many large cases we have. These are very large projects that we've got steered out toward specialized groups within the laboratory. The Korean War project is everything that's come out of North Korea, to include recent disinterments. 7,800 unaccounted for. You've heard that number before. Cabanatuan prison camp, we've got about 950 unaccounted for. We're doing active disinterments down in Manila, supporting that project. USS Oklahoma, I think we've got a couple Oklahoma families here today. 388 unaccounted for. That's actually not accurate at all. That number's way down because we've made about 80 IDs out of them so far. Battle of Tarawa, I know we've got a couple, I heard some Tarawa families this morning as well. 500-ish unaccounted for. We've got an entire team that is dealing with partner excavations from down there, as well as 93 disinterments that we've had come into the laboratory, working all of those remains. USS West Virginia and California have come through the laboratory as well. That's a brand new project for us. It's a difficult one, the same as the Battle of Buna down in Papua New Guinea, 107 unaccounted for. Solomon Islands is a very large land battle that we've got mixed Japanese and US service personnel in, and trying to sort those out. That one's a huge one. I'll show you some photos from that. So for us, in an ideal world, when we're dealing with disinterments, we would hope that we would have one casket, one individual represented. Seems like that's the way it should go. Unfortunately, with many of these disinterment projects, we get one casket, 8 bundles, 15 people represented. It's difficult. Science has matured over 60 years, which is why we're going back into those disinterments to see if we can pull out individuals. For the Cabanatuan prison camp, Common Grave 717 is a particularly fun conflagration. That's a big word. I learned it yesterday. I think it means mess. 14 caskets, or 14 individuals originally associated with one common grave. Cabanatuan, what they did was, it was a prison camp, and so every day they dug out a mass grave, and everyone who died the night before, they put them all into the same mass grave. They covered that up. The next day, they did the same thing. 2,717 or so of our service members died down in Cabanatuan and were buried in these mass graves. Those were excavated in the 1940s, brought in through the AGRS system. They moved some identifications out. Others, because they were so badly commingled, they couldn't figure them out. They remain as unknowns. For us, Common Grave 717, we thought had 14 individuals associated with it. We got 13 caskets out of the ground, and each casket typically has 2 to 8 DNA sequences associated with it. So each of the colored bones here represents a different person out of a single casket. So you can see why in the 1940s it was a little difficult for them to try and make an identification when none of the elements went together. And we've only figured that out with the help of DNA. Oklahoma, also a very big commingled project. As you know, the Oklahoma went down in Pearl Harbor. They raised it. They got all of the service members out that they could. Most of them were badly commingled in the bottom of the ship. I've seen some historic photographs, moving remains out of there that were just piles of bones. It was amazing. We got our first casket out in 2003 because we thought we had an individual, in the caskets there's individual bundles, and we thought one of these individual bundles was one guy. So we went in, we looked at that, we did some DNA off of it, and we went, wow, that's not just one individual. And we did all the remains in that casket, and we ended up with 94 different DNA sequences in one casket. The project is big, the scope is large, but it's not insurmountable, and we're doing really, really well at this, and we're going to get answers for you guys. Solomons, here's a typical accession out of the Solomon Islands. Comes in looking like that, and then we start to piece out different individual DNA sequences. Each little blue box here is an individual person based on DNA, all out of just one field recovery, off of one battle site. Probably 60% of those are Japanese individuals that we're sorting out via DNA and also a new technology that we're trying to bring online, which is isotope analysis. So we're looking at different ways of pulling these remains out so that we get to who we need and we can repatriate the others back to their host country. That is pretty much special projects. So to kind of sum all of this up, in 2017, we accounted for 183 DoD personnel. That's not right. Yeah, no, new identifications. 201 was the total number of identifications in 2017. 2018, I think we're sitting at 85 so far, 86. 85, that was perfect, all right? We're at 85 IDs right now, and it's growing, and this is our busy season, so we're kind of hoping that we're going to get close to that 200 number again this year. Any questions for me? I'll be here all day. Perfect. Let me introduce to you our next speaker, Dr. Timothy McMahon Afdil, and he's going to talk to you about things that make me look very not so smart.
I need to go. Controller. So please call me Tim. My grandfather was at my dissertation when you have to defend your doctoral, and he came up afterwards to me and he said, son, I'm really, really proud of you. I didn't understand a word of what you were talking about, but never forget, you put your pants on the same way I do. I said, I got it, Grandpa. Stay humble. So today I'm here to talk about a partnership that's been over 26 years. We've been a partner with the DPAA, and this is the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System who I work with. One of the divisions is DNA Operations, and this section is the Armed Forces DNA Identification Lab. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about DNA and try and do, in the immortal words of Joe Friday, stick to the facts. Because how many people about a month ago heard that that astronaut who came back to Earth, his DNA changed? Did you see that in the paper? Your DNA doesn't change, okay? But there are things that the DNA produces that does change. So I'll stick to the facts and hopefully clear up some misconceptions from, Miss Abby Shuto, a CSI, has put out there and things like that. Then I'm going to talk about the way ahead. What are we doing? Because every year DNA gets more damaged, as Dr. Berg talked about. So we're constantly in a process of developing methods to keep our success rates high. And then I'm going to talk about you, the family members, are the most important part of our mission, and that is where you'll fit in on this. So when I talk about DNA, I'm going to throw out a lot of stuff. As Jack said, we're drinking from the fire hose, but don't fear. If something doesn't sink in right away, if you go to the DPA's website under the Resources tab, you'll find a DNA section, and there will be an in-depth number of questions that we commonly get with the scientific answers that I have written for them. So you can always refer to that if you need to get more information. And then my email is on there. Do not hesitate to email. It may take me a couple days to get back to you, but I will get back to you. Okay. So the Armed Forces Medical Examiner has multiple missions. We have a current day mission. I have 12 scientists assigned to that, and that is doing all of the DNA testing to support identifications for current theaters of operations or accidents. In 1991, we did mitochondrial DNA testing to support an identification from Southeast Asia. The end of the first Gulf War, the medical examiners actually had to use DNA, which was in its fledgling infancy then, to support identifications of service members killed in Desert Storm. But we didn't have any references, so we had to go back to the mothers and fathers and the wives and the kids to get these. So out of the past accounting mission, we set up what we call the DNA repository. So right now I have 7.7 million DNA cards on file for all active duty and reserve military members so that we will have that direct reference moving forward. Okay, and that came out of the success of the past accounting mission. I do have the past accounting. I'm going to talk to that. I have 150 scientists underneath me. 75 of those scientists are dedicated to the past accounting mission. So a full half of my laboratory is doing past accounting. And then the FRS database. So I talk about current day, I have that DNA reference card. Well, DNA wasn't even first described until 1952. We couldn't even do anything or sequence it until 1977, and we sure couldn't do any what we call copying it or making more of it until 1988. So we had no idea what DNA was. So that's where the family references come in. So I have 12 scientists who are dedicated to running those family references that we get every year to grow our database so that we have those samples to compare to those unknowns that we're doing for DPAA. And then we do a lot of other things for National Transportation Bureau and other countries as dictated by the Secretary of Defense. As Greg said, we are an accredited laboratory like them. We first became accredited in 1998. We were the first mitochondrial DNA testing laboratory to be accredited. And basically, as Greg said, it's a set of standards that we follow that give you confidence that what we're doing meets what other laboratories are doing in the world. And the way that they instill that is you have to have outside laboratories come in and review your processes every year. Okay. One of the big things that came up for us was in 1995, soon after one of the first identifications, DOD had to make a ruling, was DNA feasible for the identification process? And through the oversight committee, which had a lot of big-time scientists on it, they reviewed our processes. They actually had a sample resent to the FSS, the Forensic Science Services in England, because a university lab had got a different answer than we did, and the FSS got the same answer we did. But it said the DNA is viable as long as your policies and procedures are in place. And for us, because it's very damaged DNA, we do everything in duplicate. And those two answers have to match at the end for us to report out a result to the DPAA. Okay? Every DNA result will not necessarily lead to a new ID. As we talked about, for us, it's the two degraded, the commingled, or no family references. Okay? But we're going to talk about the way ahead on a lot of this stuff as we go forward. There are two types of DNA in your body. There's nuclear DNA, which is this single blue blob that you see up there. That is half of the DNA that you get from your mother and your father, okay? That is what makes you, how fast you're going to go gray, how tall you're going to be, what color your eyes are, and that is the DNA that you can actually do two tests from, what we call short tandem repeats. You've heard a lot about those, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. The second type of DNA is mitochondrial DNA. And this comes from the mitochondria. They're the energy producers in your body. They give your cells the ability to do what they need to do. But that only comes from the mother, okay? So when we talk about that nuclear DNA, there's 23 pairs of chromosomes. One comes from mom, one comes from dad. 22 of those contain the markers that your state, local, and federal crime labs test. We use the exact same test on them. That's called autosomal short tandem repeats, okay? And right now, that test is good for mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, or children of the missing service members. The 23rd pair of chromosomes is what makes you a female, XX, or me, a male, XY. We actually have a test, what we call Y short-term tandem repeats, or YSTRs. That allows us to trace the paternal line. Okay, so from nuclear DNA, I get two tests that I can do. But a lot of people, you'll hear, oh, we should be leading with nuclear DNA. That's the definitive. Well, if I'm doing criminal casework like I used to do, and was asking the question of who committed this crime against the general world's population of 7.6 billion people, then yes, nuclear DNA is the way to go, because I have an unknown, I have a police investigator who gets me a suspect, and I can do that direct comparison, okay? But we're talking 70 years out, okay? And as you get to a person, you only share about 12% of your DNA, nuclear DNA, with the first cousin. So you would have to get 3 to 5 first cousins on the mother's side and the father's side to get the same result that we get from mitochondrial DNA or a YSTR. So we lead differently with mitochondrial DNA because there's thousands of copies of that mitochondrial DNA to that single nuclear. But it's a common sequence. That's, you know, for my mitochondrial DNA matches 7% of all Caucasians. But you saw that Dr. Berg was talking about the USS Oklahoma and how commingled. So if I was to take a 500-piece puzzle and take out all the border pieces and give you the remaining 250 pieces, you'd want to kill me. You'd never put it together. So what we do is we use mitochondrial DNA to set those borders to identify the unique sequences and the more common sequences, and then we go into YSTRs and autosomal STRs to include or exclude a person, and then ultimately write what we call a believed to be report. So we use all three tests that are commercial out there now for DNA testing. And again, the biggest part is, like I said, there's thousands of copies of mitochondrial DNA. Over time, we're fighting degradation. And so when I want you to think about degradation, I want you to think about a 12-inch piece of rope. If I tell you to fold it in half and cut it to represent every year, after the first year, you have 2 6-inch pieces. You fold it in half again, you're going to have 4 3-inch pieces. You fold it again, you're going to then have 8 1.5-inch pieces. At some point, that screen is going to get too small for us to test. But if you have thousands of copies of mitochondrial DNA to that one copy of nuclear, you have a greater chance of getting a success, and that's why we lead with mitochondrial DNA. We are processing 700 samples on a rolling basis to report 250 analyses out per month so that we can get over 3,000 analyses to the DPA laboratory. That 3,000 analyses help support those 201 identifications. So we've grown from just reporting out 750 analyses in 2012 to reporting out 3,000. And part of that came to the ability to hire, I was authorized 24 new people in 2016. I actually had all 24 of them hired in 2014. And without increasing my budget, I was able to hire an additional 15 people. So a grand total of 39 new people to meet the requirements of the DPA lab. This is a colorful slide. Each one of those colors represents one of the different tests that we do. The take-home message here, and what I want, is success rates, okay? Although we're processing a lot of samples, we are metric-driven, meaning we use our success rates to drive where we're going in the future. So for any non-chemically treated sample, I have a 92% success rate of getting a mitochondrial DNA result from it. For any of those samples doing autosomal STRs or YSTRs, 57% success rate. May not sound great, but that success rate is greater than what the New York City OCME's office got for World Trade Center samples. Ours tend to be a little bit worse. We're going to talk about next generation sequencing. That success rate's about 42%, but up until 2016, our DNA success rate was 4% on those samples. So, what does this mean? When we talk about DNA, yeah, we can get all those success rates, but the bottom line is what we do is we do a comparison report, or what we call a believed to be report. And what happened last year, we issued 345 total reports. 154 of those were believed to be reports. Are the first time that we've associated an unknown sequence with a family reference. So again, issuing that to help support is one of the lines of evidence for identifications. Currently, we've issued 305 reports. 70 of those are believed to be reports, but you can see 211 are addendum. We're always going to find additional portions, especially with the commingled, but we have to issue a report on that. So we're going to talk about some of the notable casework advances. One of the biggest ones was in 2006. We call it a demineralization buffer. And I want you to think, a big word, I want you to think about turpentine. If you took turpentine and dropped it on the hood of your car, you get down to the bare metal, right? Well, demineralization buffer is kind of a turpentine for the bone. And for the first time, we were able to dissolve the bone completely. This was important because it freed up all DNA. It used to take 2.5 grams of bone. So 5 grams of bone, because we had to do it in duplicate. Now we only need 0.2 grams of bone. So we saw a 20-fold reduction. So it's increased the number of samples that can be submitted and allowed us in 2006 to switch also into that nuclear DNA testing mode. So we're going to talk about a few more of these in So the biggest part here is prior to the demon buffer, we had to use specific heavy weight-bearing bones, gave us the greatest success. Now, with the demon buffer, because we can get all of that DNA, we actually have over a 90% success rate from any non-chemically treated bone. I have to keep stressing that. We're going to talk about the chemically treated in a little bit. One of the things, because we can introduce smaller portions, is that our anthropologists, as you heard Dr. Berg say, they are highly trained and they are the best in the world at what they do. But at some point, you may not be able to determine if that bone is human or non-human. Well, we test to exhaustion, so we're not a one-and-done lab. We don't do it. If it fails, we don't stop. The reason we do that is we want the greatest success. So we can spend months troubleshooting it. So we actually determined an assay that would allow us to determine if it's human or non-human. Since 2011, 44% of the samples that we tested were non-human. That allows us to stop it quicker and get back to the important thing, testing the human remains, okay? So it's reducing time and cost. Our success rates for STRs, I told you 57%. Initially, we brought it on, it was 24%. So we're trying to figure out what is causing that. Well, purification. So once we extract the DNA, we extract all of anything that is associated with that bone. So we have to purify it. What I want you to think about is that last cup of coffee nobody wants to drink because all the grinds are in it and everything. Well, if you took that and passed it through a filter, you get the pure coffee. We actually have a very special filter that we do. We pass it through, the DNA binds to the filter, and we're able to wash that stuff, all the stuff we don't want away, and it doubled our success rates, okay? So again, looking, how can we always increase? We're always looking at what's out there, and if it's not there, we're going to create something and make it better. The newest thing was the state, local, and federal crime labs are required to move to a 23 marker kit by 2018. We actually moved to it by 2015, and it gives us a greater chance of recovering degraded DNA fragments. And so that's helped with increasing our success rates as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Korea Punch Bowl samples. These are the most famous ones, the ones that have been chemically treated. So at the end of the Korean War, there were about 850 samples that could not be identified that were returned to us. They were immersed in vats of formaldehyde for 3 to 5 days, had a hardening compound, and then baked dry. We now know that's the worst of the worst that you can do to DNA, because your DNA is like a Chinese yo-yo. You can't see it, but if I was to take it and throw it out like a Chinese yo-yo, it would actually unwind and stretch to the sun. So it's got to be packaged. So it packages around these little proteins called histones, and the DNA when the formaldehyde actually fixed the DNA, so that when we extracted it, we lost all of that DNA, and we were only recovering this part. It took 16 years for science to catch up, but in 2013, an instrument came out that was able to tell us the actual size of the DNA, and that size was what we call 50 base pairs. My current assay is only to 100 base pairs. So we knew that's why we weren't getting results, so we then created a method of our own. And we call it a capture assay because there's a lot of other DNA in there. So we made probes. I like to think of those as gum. If I put gum on the end of a stick, I can pull that silver dollar out of a drain if I wanted to. And that's what we did. We went in and we pulled the human DNA out. So in 2016, St. Patrick's Day, we reported out the first DNA result utilizing this new technology for the Korean Punch Bowl samples. Again, 16-year project with DPAA, but now we're running it. We've done 560 samples today. We've issued 89 total reports. 57 of those are first-time named reports. My success rate prior to that, 5%. I'm now running over 40%. But what we found is this assay has been extremely important. We've done 7 cases from Southeast Asia that were too degraded to go through the normal, and additional World War II samples that have been treated. And here's the thing. It's not a commercially available test, and we are the only accredited DNA forensics lab in the United States utilizing next-generation chemistry. So how does this help you? A, it reduces the time processing samples. It keeps up our success rates. It allowed me to hire 39 new scientists. ahead of time because I was supposed to hire them between 16 and 19. And as you can see, that we've gone from each year, 1,700 to about 3,000 analyses over the last 2 years. Okay. So what are our current problems and gaps? One of them is damage, so the DNA gets damaged. And one thing we learned is when we look at DNA done through the NGS method, all of these green lines show damage, which means we're not getting the authentic result. But we're looking at mechanisms that are out there in the research field to potentially repair the DNA. And so we took this sample, put it through one of the repair mechanisms, and you can see that we actually repaired the DNA, giving us a greater chance. So we're actively researching repair mechanisms. What if, like me, you match 7% of all Caucasians? Well, we only target a small portion of the mitochondrial DNA now. We actually have the ability to sequence the whole mitochondrial genome. And so we're using that to assist if we need to. Now, what if there aren't any viable references? So the brother of the service member is dead and his daughter is alive. Currently, we don't have any tests for that. Anyone here done 23andMe and Ancestry.com? Okay. So utilizing the same commercial testing that they do, this 800,000 marker, we tried a sample that we thought was really, really, really good. We recovered 800. Wasn't going to work for us. Okay. So we worked with a company through a Defense Forensics Enterprise grant called Parabon. We took the 100,000 identity targets and we narrowed it down to 15,000. So here is the 800,000, nothing worked. We narrowed it down to 15,000. We made our own assay, a capture assay again to go after it. And lo and behold, we recovered 1,095 out of the 15,000 SNPs, but it was able to accurately pull out the correct reference. And there was a mixture of maternal, paternal, and autosomal references there. So irregardless of the relationship, this assay has the ability to do that. So we are in the last of, so we have 2 more years on this grant. We are actively developing the software and testing it. It's going to be about 3 years. We're hoping that we're going to be able to validate it and get it online, but that will open up a larger pool of references for us. And again, this would be an assay that we're taking from the industry and making it work with samples that typically aren't allowed for it, the highly degraded samples. But I can't do anything without you, the family members. It's an unknown sequence. If I don't have anything to compare it to, it remains an unknown sequence. So I would like to thank each and every one of you who've stopped by or who have donated in the past. You're making me successful. I really appreciate that. A couple of things. If you are approached or if family members come to you and say, hey, I've been contacted, we collect under HIPAA. So when you go to the doctor's office and they have you sign that HIPAA form, we have the same thing. So Dr. Berg does not have access to my family reference database. Only my scientists do. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, your state, local crime labs, they don't have access to my database. Only my scientists do. And so it is very, very protected. So if you're not sure, I have 2 very talented young ladies out there, one from the FRS section, family reference section, and one from the casework section. We have everything here. We can check and see if you have it, and if you, or if you need to identify potential references for us. Okay. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much.
All right, folks, so next we're going to go into our Q&A session. If I could ask all briefers from this morning to please come forward. And we'll have the same rules of engagement as we did earlier. Just raise your hand if you have a question and we'll bring a microphone to you. What we do ask is that these questions are based on the briefings you received today. And if you do have a specific question regarding the loss of your missing loved one, that you talk to either your analyst or your service casualty officer about any types of questions that deal specifically with a loss. So with that, I'll go ahead and open up the floor for the Q&A session.
When you identify Japanese remains that are in caskets that are that have intermingled remains in them, what do you do with the Japanese remains?
We've got a program that's set up with the Japanese Ministry of Welfare and Defense, and we return the remains to their consulates in Honolulu, and they come over and they review the forensic side of that, and then those get repatriated back to Japan. To also clarify a little bit for that goes for any country. Yeah, any country. Yeah, so if we end up with some Papua New Guinea remains, we'll do the same exact thing. We'll repatriate them back to Papua New Guinea.
So a question on the DNA. I think what you were saying was that then the more DNA that you get from a family member or from a family, the better?
That's a very good question, ma'am. Absolutely correct. So right now, remember, there's the 3 tests that we do. There's a mitochondrial DNA, so we'd like to have 2 maternal references. There's the Y chromosomal short tandem repeat from the nuclear, so we would like at least 2 paternal references. And then autosomal, if we can get them, we'd like 2 of those as well. The reason is that we will report out what we call a combined statistic. It actually it gives the weight to the evidence. And with commonality of sequences at the mitochondrial level going to the YSTR or the auto, we can increase the statistical weight. So for example, my mitochondrial DNA is 33% more likely because I'm a common sequence. If we recover, do YSTRs on myself, and we recover 5 or 6 markers on that, it can jump to 200,000 times more likely. So the more references we have, the better we're able to support the DPAA.
So when you say the autosomal, is that different than, I guess I don't understand where the autosomal fits in.
So there's 2 types of DNA. When we talk about nuclear DNA, and that nuclear DNA is half from your mom, half from your dad, there are 2 types of short tandem repeat tests. One of those is the autosomal short tandem repeats, which go to 22 of the 23 chromosomes that you get from your mom and dad. Those are the ones that your state and local crime labs use, and right now you can use them for our cases to in what we call paternity. So if we have a missing service member and we have the mother and father, we can do a paternity test. If we have the missing service member and we have brothers and sisters, we can do a sibling test. And then if the missing service member had kids, we can use the kids to do a paternity test as well. And that's how we do those autosomal short tandem repeats.
We're taking questions.
Go ahead.
I understand that you're giving priority to those areas where climate conditions would deteriorate remains more quickly, but my question is, do you have individual groups around the world that are ongoing working on other cases or other cemeteries or whatever, or are those higher priority cases taken first before others?
So ours is a global mission, as you heard. This mission was born after the Vietnam conflict. And so most of our archival research, most of our historical research is based upon the Vietnam War. The Korean War Congress added it to us in 1996, and then World War II, interestingly enough, wasn't added by Congress until 2010. And as you heard explained this morning, A lot of this is based upon finding the historical research archival information. It's a very linear process. And until we get that done, we can't move to field investigations, and we certainly can't move to field excavations. And so part of what you're hearing today is that build out of World War II. We have talented historians, researchers, and analysts that are developing that casework that allows us to conduct field investigations and then hopefully excavations. But because Vietnam is where we have most of the research done, it's where a majority of our resources are put against now. But you're starting to see Korea build out, you're starting to see World War II build out, and that balance that we try to achieve is that global, worldwide presence.
We're taking questions via Facebook Live, and for everyone here in the room, I encourage you to visit our website at dpaa.mil. Click on the link for Facebook, and if you haven't already, like our page. There you can see an archive of today's sessions, and you can also watch future family update briefings. So, Mr. McKeag, tying into your answer, Helen from San Antonio asked if there's any discussion on expanding the mission to actively work World War I cases or earlier.
Would you know?
Oh, thank you. Hi, ma'am. The legislation that we have only designates from World War II forward by act of Congress. That being said, a lot of, again, World War I, where was World War I fought? For the most part in Europe. Well, World War II, the European theater. So we have, in the past, we have accounted for some World War I veterans. In my mind, I recall there was a Marine from World War I that we recovered, oh, thank you, that we recovered and were able to identify. So although World War I is not mandated that we recover, we have on occasion. Also, bear in mind the DNA, that those family reference samples from, again, Vietnam, Korea, World War II is a bit of a challenge. Going back to World War I, that's going to be an incredible challenge. But again, on occasion, when we found some World War I remains, we have been able to, in case of this Marine, be able to identify them. I hope that answers her question.
I would add, so Dr. McMahon, he talked about the need for family reference samples, the things that you all contribute. For Vietnam, it's about 85% that we have family reference samples on hand of the missing. For Korea, it's about 91%, but for World War II, it's only 6%. So when you think about that, the predominance of our losses are in World War II, but we only have 6% family reference samples on hand from the missing. An interesting side note too, thanks to the talent of our laboratory as well as the Armed Forces DNA Identification Lab, is that several years ago we were given samples that were recovered from the USS Monitor from the Civil War. And there were 2 sailors that were found in the turret of the Monitor. These talented gentlemen that you see on my left and right, their talented scientists were able to find DNA sequences from that. Now, unfortunately, all we were able to obtain, lacking of family reference samples, was narrowing it to, I believe, 12 individuals. And so those 2 sailors from the USS Monitor from the Civil War are buried as a group in Arlington and recognized by the United States Navy. But again, they were able to narrow down 12 individuals that could have been from those 2 sailors. Interesting story.
My first cousin has been listed as missing in action ever since Operation Market Garden, and he was with the 101st Airborne Division 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. In 1947, there was a report issued by the Army, and I want to read a sentence because I don't quite understand what it would mean. It lists a number of the paratroopers that were all killed in action. And it said that that their remains were disposed of by the enemy, I'm sure referring to the Germans, in a manner which precludes recovery. What would the words precludes recovery refer to?
My best guess to that means we don't know where they buried them. So, back in the day, when they went looking for those remains, the enemy buried those remains somewhere that was not marked, and we don't know, which all then goes back to our historian team to go and do the archival research to try and figure out a witness to that burial, perhaps, or a grid coordinate or something else that we could then go and excavate. So the precludes, recovery just means we have no idea where they put them. But hopefully someone does, and hopefully we'll get an answer to that.
After World War II and the Korean War, the Army Graves Registration Service were the teams that scoured the world looking for those that were left behind. And in many cases, they were very successful. In many cases, much of the remains that are buried in a European cemetery, whether it's Normandy or elsewhere, or Manila, are a marked grave that was the result of Army Graves Registration Service teams finding and being able to identify, back in the 40s and 50s, an individual lost in combat. Oftentimes they would scour the battlefield, but oftentimes they would look for graves that the enemy had used, either at a POW camp or at a battlefield. And those records are what we're trying to access and what we're trying to leverage and exploit to be able to find clues, leads by which we can find your loved ones today.
Yeah, my uncle was lost in 1944 in World War II. And because of you gentlemen, my aunts and my mother got to know that he was found. And I learned today that my aunts and my DNA were made a positive result, and I wanted to say thank you from all of our family. You can't possibly know how that means to us.
God bless you.
Just curious, not related to our family. In the news, they just had how they found the killer in California working off a Jed Match, all the people that put their DNA for Ancestry.com and 23andMe. Do you use those? Is that a possibility then to find service members in the future, to have genealogists try to?
So when we look at the Ancestry.com and the 23andMe, they look at 800,000 targets. 100,000 of those are identity. In the article they talked about was they were able to link it, but they still had to do a lot of investigation, because when you, remember I showed you your first cousin, you have about 12%. They're great for investigative leads after your first cousin. So they actually had to then, the investigators had to say, okay, here's a family, let's link it back. Was there anyone in that time? Then they actually, what was called the Abandoned DNA Act, that individual had left a cup, and they were able to swab that, and then they used traditional STRs to confirm it. So in that case, what we're looking to do is, the one slide I talked about is, we tried that commercial test, the same one that they used. So the Golden State Killer went and did his swab, put it into 23andMe, and we tried that. Our DNA samples that we get are so bad that out of the 800,000 markers, we recovered about 1,000 of them, and you can't do anything with that. So what we do is what we do best is we didn't give up. We partnered with a company called Parabon, who is doing some of this type of assays for state and local crime labs. And we said, okay, we're never going to get 100,000, but can you get me 15,000 markers that will work with any relative as long as they're within the fourth generation? So that type of an assay, if we can get it finalized and up and working, preliminary experiments look like it's working. We had to develop something that is not commercially available to do, would be useful in those type of situations. So.
If I were to, through a casual conversation, find out that somebody has a missing from World War II, the first thing I would do is say, have you given DNA? If they said no, who do they contact?
So the belly button for that is always the service casualty offices. So as you talk to that individual, if they say that they're missing service members from the Navy, you would contact, you can go to the DPAA website, and there's the list of the service casualty offices with a number. They can actually call there, and that will start the ball rolling. If the casualty offices determine through talking with them that they're a viable reference, they actually will send one of my DNA kits directly to them with a FedEx label. So at no cost, they will take a swab, and then it will come directly to my lab. And my computer system talks with the casualties, and we close the loop so that the DPA then knows we have a reference on file. Great question.
Dr. Berg, Kelly from Virginia asked about the USS Oklahoma project, so thank you for that update. What lessons have we learned from that project that we can apply going forward?
That's a huge question. Thanks for that, Kelly. Wow, man, that's a mean one too. Lessons learned. Trust your DNA. Use that as a sorting technique. But we've also gone through, just like Tim's lab does, we also continuously innovate. And multiple of our researchers and staff members, scientists out at Offutt as well as in Hawaii are working on these large commingled projects, and they're doing metric observations and some non-metric observations from the skeleton so that we can potentially unravel the commingling using huge databases of measurements to join up two bones together without using DNA. So that hopefully we lessen a burden on Tim's lab by doing this through not only a visual but also a metric pair match sort of situation. So that's one of the huge research projects that we've got going. I think there's 4 or 5 publications already out on it, and they're doing a huge new database out there that we're wrapping up and putting together as a laboratory technique called Cora that should be going live in about a month. So that's one of the huge lessons that we've learned from that. But we're taking those and we're being able to apply those lessons to these other large commingled projects, as I talked about, the USS California, as well as the West Virginia. Those also are commingled, so we're using those techniques out of the Oklahoma to apply them to the next set of commingled remains. And hopefully, if we get something from Korea, we might have to do that as well. Thanks, I think.
I was wondering if any other countries are actively seeking to find their missing in action folks as well. And one thing that came to mind is like identifying folks from mass graves, such as the death camps in World War II. Is any of that going on?
Well, as we just discussed, we've worked with the Japanese in that regard. As I mentioned in my remarks, the South Koreans have the MACRI organization. And I will speak from personal experience. I worked the Vietnam War back in Washington. The Vietnamese, surprisingly, in the last couple of years, they have really ramped up their personnel accounting effort. When I first started, and some of the other, dare I say, gray beards who've been around, started with the Vietnamese, they would always come out and try, I would use the phrase, trot out, well, you know, you Americans have 2,600 unaccounted for. We have over 300,000, but we're a humanitarian nation and we're going to help you. It was always like a little bit of a zing, and we kind of took it as kind of a boink, boink, pointing in the eye. But in the last couple of years, the Vietnamese have stood up, a couple years ago, they stood up something called a National Steering Committee 1237, which is essentially, as best we can determine, seems to be like a DPAA type entity at the I believe the Prime Minister's level. And within each Vietnamese military district, they have something called a K company that's been going out and going into Cambodia and going into Laos looking for their remains. And they have approached us on several occasions, especially in March when Mr. McCaig was there, asking for our assistance to help them find information and account for their losses. So anytime we come across information in our files regarding Vietnamese losses, for example, they attack a fire base, we kill 100 NVA, and what we did back during the war was probably get a bulldozer, dig a trench, put the bodies in for health and safety, sanitary reasons. We find that information, we have passed it to the Vietnamese to say, here at this location is a mass grave of your guys. So, you know, Vietnam, Laos, no. Cambodia, because of the Khmer Rouge Holocaust, my God, there would be remains, well, there are remains literally everywhere. And the Cambodians haven't expressed an interest, nor have the Lao. As for Europe, I think I will defer to the boss.
So the United States pursues this mission with the most rigor and most commitment than any other nation on the planet in terms of not only searching for, but going through the process of identifying and reuniting with the families. The South Koreans are the closest to us. In fact, as you heard mentioned today, South Korea approached the United States 12 years ago and asked for our help in establishing that. The Japanese, they are looking for 600,000 of their missing throughout the Pacific. Culturally, the Japanese, if they find Japanese remains, will cremate on site, take the ashes back to Japan, and inter them. Problematic for us, which is why we're working closely with the Japanese to ensure that there's no inadvertent destruction of American remains that might have been co-located with the Japanese. In the case of our European partners, it's on a reactive basis. If they come across or find that believed to be British soldier, believed to be French soldier, is found by our teams or whomever, they will then go through the process of reactively trying to an identification. But for us, it's all about the rigor that we put into it. Everybody else, I believe, is more along the lines of where the soldier fell is their final resting place, which is why we believe that this defines us as a nation. That here we are, decades later, still searching, still finding, still identifying, and more importantly, still repatriating to the families.
I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead.
So along that lines too, in 2015, in a science article, it was published that Vietnam was starting their past accounting mission, and they were going to start utilizing DNA. The Department of Justice, through the International Criminal Assistance Training Program, went over to help set up the three main players in those. I spent 4 weeks over there helping them design the labs, and then over the next year and a half, we actually sent scientists over to transfer our testing methods to them, with the fact that if they do recover an American service member, at least they're processing samples or have an understanding of how to process them to determine that. Along the same lines, our testing methods, there was a civil war in Cyprus in which the remains were very, very chemically treated and buried into a common grave. Cyprus has utilized a lot of other laboratories, to include some commercial labs here in the US, without getting results. We actually have tested some of their samples with our testing methods and are transferring that knowledge to them now so that they can do it. So what we've learned as a partner and as our nation's promise to recover is now being transferred at both the DPA's level, but also through us at the laboratory level for DNA testing.
If I may, if I can add one other country, and the boss spoke of Japan and South Korea. I would respectfully say that there is one other country that is equally on a par and maybe even a step above us, and that's Israel. And the Israelis don't have a lot of unaccounted for, but it's such a small country that everyone knows the family and the kibbutz and the guy who is missing. They are very, very serious about accounting for their lost soldiers.
I'm not sure how far out this question is, but I have two scrapbooks full of letters and things that my brother sent home. What about his DNA? Would be on an envelope or?
So we do testing on envelopes, but as a last resort, if we don't have any of the other references, like a maternal or paternal, we will use an envelope. But because they've been in the scrapbook and a lot of people have touched them, sometimes it's very difficult to determine, because a modern sample, like if you touch that, I could pick you up very easily compared to the authentic. And so, but what I will tell you is if you have a scrapbook, like a baby book that used to be done a lot, and there are hair clippings in there from the person's first haircut, or baby teeth, we will actually end up having to use all of the tooth so you don't get it back, but those are actually direct references that work very, very well for us. And so those are things that we look for moving forward. And if there are no references, but you may have some of that, get with your service casualty office, tell them what you have. They will contact my lab or me, and we'll discuss to see which ones are good. The last thing we want to do is take a personal memento away that may not, because it can be a destructive process. But teeth and hair, if you got those in a baby book, they work really well. So great question.
All right, folks, so that'll wrap up the Q&A. If I can have a round of applause for our briefers. And then just a couple of quick admin notes. Number one, in your packet that you received this morning when you picked up your registration, there is a survey. Please fill out that survey so that we can take your feedback. We do read them. We take this seriously and be a part of the process to make sure that we move forward and we're doing the right things. So since we've kind of overshot here just a little bit, we're going to kick back up after lunch at 1:45. So what we'll have back in this room will be the World War II breakout session. And then my left, right out the hall, if you go around the men's bathroom, around the corner, past the elevator, or use the elevator, there's a set of stairs there as well. The Vietnam War breakout will be in the Trimble room, and the Korean War will be in the Whitley room. It is lunchtime, and thanks to the hotel and the Blue Horse, they are offering a Caesar wrap with fries or chips. It's a grilled chicken, lettuce, tomatoes for $10. They are set up to their staff to have about 130 to 150 folks come in, but there's also a pick up and go station right there beside it, and there are a couple local places as well within like a mile distance. But again, so we'll kick back up at 1:45, and if you have any questions of where you need to go, please just ask any of us, and we'll make sure that you get to the right place. So thank you, folks, and enjoy lunch.
Anything for me? I think I have the next slide.
The next slide is